Red Dwarf was back in February 1992 for its 5th series. This was the second series in a row to start and finish in February and March, a sign of a rare consistency in terms of when the show was broadcast. Series 5, like any series before it, featured some key changes, some more noticeable than others. Long-term Red Dwarf director Ed Bye, who had directed every episode from the first 4 series, was unavailable to direct Series 5, so in came Juliet May as the new director. Series 5 does therefore have a slightly different look to it. Ed Bye had clearly become quite good at directing Red Dwarf. Each series improved on the last, even if the improvements were only quite minor. Due to the big change in director, Series 5 does feel a bit lacking in how it looks. Juliet May didn't do a poor job. In fact, I'd say Juliet May did quite a good job. However, Juliet May quit Red Dwarf Series 5 before filming the series had wrapped, so the writers, Doug Naylor and Rod Grant, stepped in to direct. Juliet May only directed 2 episodes solo, the series opener Hollow Ship and the 3rd episode Terraform. Doug Naylor and Rod Grant did a pretty good job with the episodes they directed, and you cannot tell from looking that they took over directing an incomplete series, and some unfinished episodes as well. Hollow Ship opens the 5th series in a rather underwhelming fashion. The episode isn't bad, but it falls short of the high standard that has been set at this stage in the series. It's cool to see other holograms besides Rimmer, and the set design is rather good. The scene with Don Warrington is fantastic and probably the best scene of the episode, but Hollow Ship seems somewhat lacking. It's still a great episode, but doesn't reach the heights of the previous series openers. However, The Inquisitor is a fantastic episode. Conceptually speaking, it's not too far away from the previous series episode Justice, but it is still very distinct in its own right. The Inquisitor is very well paced. It has this relentless momentum in many of its scenes, and this makes the whole episode work very well. The basic concept is pretty good, a growing sign of Doug Naylor and Rod Grant's confidence in writing science fiction concepts. The first 2 series were pretty solid at the comedy side of things, but from the 3rd series onwards, the science fiction side of things starts to improve hugely. The Inquisitor could easily have worked as a straight-out drama, as the more serious elements work really effectively. The episode is really well shot. There are some nice handheld shots which convey a sense of chaos, which fits in nicely with many of the scenes. So The Inquisitor is a great episode. It's not one of the best, but it's still thoroughly enjoyable, with the performances and the science fiction concepts being particular highlights. Terraform is a cracking episode. The introduction, in which a wrecked Crichton sends for help with the aid of one of the eyes and one of his hands, was fantastically done, the humour being very well realised. The POV Crichton shots were also very nicely done, with some great details added in. It really added to the overall aesthetic. Robert Llewellyn is great in the first scene, especially as he has nobody to work alongside. The scene where Lister and the cat type out a conversation is absolutely fantastic. The setup leading into it was really well timed, and in all honesty, I cannot find any faults with the scene. As an individual scene, it is one of the best in Red Dwarf's long history. The set design and attention to detail in this episode is top notch. The lighting on the Psy Moon is brilliant and really adds to the tone that the crew were trying to create. Chris Barry is on top form in this episode, as this episode centers around a planetoid structured around Rimmer's mind. Chris Barry is the star of the episode. Some of the lines that Rimmer says are absolute classics. Terraform is really entertaining, it's very well paced, the humour is really on point, the performances are all great, the set design is of a particularly high standard this time round, and the concept is really inventive. These science fiction concepts no longer feel like parody, but feel like genuinely well written concepts in their own right. Quarantine is a very memorable episode. Conceptually it's very good, but that is very much par for the course with Series 5. The opening segment of the episode makes for a really solid way to start the plot. The humour works really well, and once again the set design is simply superb. Quarantine is an episode where a large amount of it takes place on board Red Dwarf, unlike most of the episodes in Series 5. The performances are all fantastic, with Chris Barry as the holovirus-infected Rimmer being on cracking form. The jokes whilst Rimmer is infected is top notch, and shows a growing confidence in writing jokes coupled with sci-fi from Rod Grant and Doug Naylor. One of the main scenes in which Crichton, Lister and the cat are stuck in quarantine together is a real highlight, where the performances alongside the dialogue make a thoroughly entertaining viewing experience. Quarantine is very good. It's one of the best episodes of Red Dwarf. The concepts are all brilliantly realised, and the performances are simply fantastic. Demons and Angels isn't half bad. As is par for the course with Series 5, the storyline is detailed and complex. This works very much in the show's favour, and the jokes in particular benefit from the ludicrously over-the-top scripts. The complexity, especially in the case of this episode, suits what Red Dwarf has evolved into very well. The set designs are once again fantastically done. The two alternative versions of Red Dwarf look superb. The story is really great. It's very inventive, and the alternative versions of the Dwarfers are brilliant, especially the darker, villainous ones. The pacing is mostly great, although it could have perhaps been a bit sharper. The story does dawdle at certain points, and if this wasn't the case, a few more jokes or story beats could have slotted in. There's a lot to like with Demons and Angels. Despite its flaws, it's still a very entertaining episode of Red Dwarf. Back to Reality has a lot going on. Conceptually and comedically, this episode strikes gold. The opening few minutes of the episode are dripping with atmosphere. The musical score, model shots, and lighting make for a very atmospheric first few minutes. As is the standard for Series 5, the set design is absolutely brilliant. Some of the sets were reused sets from previous episodes, but you cannot tell. Timothy Spall as Andy makes for a great guest appearance. His lines are some of the best in the episode. The so-called alternative reality that dwarfers find themselves in was really well realised on screen. The alternative personalities had their comedic potential mined perfectly, especially the cat's alter ego, Dwayne Dibley. As a finale to Series 5, it's pretty good, but as an episode of Red Dwarf, it works very well and is frequently mentioned as being one of the show's strongest ever episodes. Series 5 was another high-standard series of Red Dwarf. The stories became more complex in every sense, and this simply showed an ever-evolving TV show. Series 5 isn't quite as good as Series 4, but that's only by the narrowest of margins, and it's still a highly enjoyable series of Red Dwarf. Series 5 marked the final appearance of Hattie Hage's Holly. The character had been increasingly absent in this series. In some episodes, Holly's screen time is reduced to that of a few minutes and a few lines. There were more changes to come in Series 6, so in many respects, Series 5 marks the end of classic Red Dwarf. But in other ways, it really doesn't.